intervene versus interrupt. We are an interventionist society. Everything has to go to shit. And then, once it's in the shit, we intervene with medication, with therapy, with surgery, with all kinds of stuff that we never would have needed had we just learned to interrupt before it became a big deal. Now, we talk medication, therapy, surgery. That's on the far end. Right here, in the middle end, or the middle ground, is exactly what Cecily just said. I start to overthink. So then I have conversations in my head with all these different thoughts. I try to work them all out. That is not interrupting the pattern.
Yeah.
That is cascading it towards an intervention crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what we don't want.
You know, I could tell you, we're just going to take today for an example for myself. Let's go back to it for a second, because I can tell you what would have happened in the past, right?
Yeah.
Because I was not in the past very good at talking about what I might have been experiencing, and I would have donned that superwoman cape.
Right.
I was a people pleaser, so I wouldn't want to impact Brian's day in a negative way. I would suppress the emotion, not acknowledge what I was feeling, and in the process of that suppression, what would end up happening was I would push it all down, and it would build even bigger. Right, so the physical responses would grow.
Yep.
The stories would grow, and before I knew it, at some point this afternoon, I would have just fallen to pieces.
Yes.
I would have been a bubbling, crying
It would have been a
pool.
slow burn, but it would have come.
And it could have parlayed into days upon days of having to come back from that emotional despair that I would have put myself into. Right, so today's essentially today. How did I interrupt? Well, I interrupted by walking upstairs and saying to Brian, hey, I don't feel so good today.
And we had a little conversation.
Interruption. Boom. Done.
Right. So here's a couple of things. First of all, Hunter Barrow, comment of the day. Once I start self-loathing, I then try and make things worse with self-sabotage. That is a vulnerable thing to say. I have mad respect for it. There are very few people watching this right now who can't relate to that.
Yeah.
You know you do it. The difference between you and what Hunter just said is that you might not be aware you're doing it in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to bring awareness to. So let's talk about Carrie being an overfeeler, Cecily, myself, Papa Draps, and JJ being an overthinker, and Hunter being a self-loather.
Yep.
What is the difference between interrupt versus intervene? Well, when we placate to the words, the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings, we move into self-sabotage. Whatever that means to you. Carrie would have been a puddle of tears by 2 o'clock this afternoon had she not interrupted what she was feeling. When my overthinking used to start, I would be a puddle of angry, volcanic danger that Carrie would have to help me walk back from the ledge by 2 o'clock this afternoon. Right? I want you to think about your usual suspect, which was number 2. Like a baby having a temper tantrum.
Right.
Okay? If you don't interrupt your self-loathing, your overthinking, your overfeeling, if you don't interrupt it, it's going to explode. If you try, like Cecily talked about, like I admitted I used to do, compartmentalizing it all and having a conversation with it and try to rationalize it all, you know what you do? You fan the flames.
Right.
You ever said to a 2-year-old, stop it! Stop having a temper tantrum. What does a 2-year-old do? Gets a hell of a lot fucking louder.
Of course.
You're fanning the flames.
Yep.
Interrupting it simply means you're creating what's called a pattern interrupt. You're acknowledging it, you're aware of it, and you're saying, nope, done.
Yep.
You may have to do that a few times.
I was going to make that exact point.
You may have to do that a few times.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's like owning your space.
Yeah.
The more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you rehearse it, the better conditioned you get at it.
Yes.
And scientifically, you start to change the neurological predispositions. You have to understand the way the human brain works. It lays down these neurological pathways, right? And if we're used to taking that path, that's the path your brain knows.
Right.
So every single time Cecily or myself or JJ would start trying to argue with or make nice with or try to figure out all these overthinking things, the neurological pathway would just be fed more and more stimulus of this is what I do.
Yep.
Eventually a reaction comes. The more you say, nope, I'm overthinking, done. and you repeat that, the human brain is plastic. What does that mean? It changes. You change the neurological pathways. Now you have more control.
Yep.
So the whole key is to identify your usual suspect and learn to pattern interrupt it before an intervention is required.
I mean, absolutely. And you already said this, but I just want to reinforce this because I think that everybody that I have ever worked with falls under the delusion that the first time is the only time you need to interrupt it. It doesn't work.
Why is this working, Brian and Carrie?
It just doesn't work that way. Can I tell you something? Again, as I've been sitting here, I've interrupted myself I don't know how many times to kind of bring myself back down and calm the physiological response I was talking to you about yesterday, right? So talk about like in the moment learning for you guys.
Right.
But like that's what interruption means, right? You don't interrupt one time with the expectation that the rest of the day or the rest of the hour is going to be, daisies and flowers and rainbows and puppies, right? No, interruption is a practice that has to be consistent. And maybe at the beginning, you as you begin this process, you interrupt every 5 minutes, right?
Right.
But as you progress forward, the interruptions do not have to be as aggressive. They don't have to be as frequent because you become practiced at it. And like Brian said, you're changing those neurological pathways.
As soon as you start interrupting the patterns, you change the pathways, you gain control.
Exactly.
It's the craziest thing. Are we not killing this today?
Can we share it out?
Let's get the share train rocking. Choo choo. Press share right now. We want a minimal of 40 shares. Who doesn't need to know this shit?
You know what?
Who doesn't need to know that situations and drama and haters and sadness doesn't have to